happened yet, but we're going to start recording. Here we go. You just have to accept that as it comes up. Thank you very much. This meeting is being recorded. Vital Communities will share today's recording with all of you after this meeting. I'm just going to do a quick Zoom tutorial before I turn it over to Sarah Jackson from Vital Communities. We have over 100 people registered for today, but we kept this meeting in a traditional Zoom format so that we can see each other. We hope you'll leave your camera on, which you can do by clicking on the camera icon in the bottom left corner of your screen. To minimize audio interference and to enable our panelists to speak, we've automatically muted the audience, so we hope that you can just stay on mute for this session today. We're going to be using the chat function today, so you can find that at the bottom of your screen by clicking on chat. You'll be able to send messages to everyone in the virtual room. And since we don't have an allocated Q&A time today, please type your questions into the chat and we will either respond to it in the chat or hold on to those and respond to them in our second session as well. Please be kind and respectful with any comments you make in the chat. We will have tech support monitoring the chat. If you have any technical issues, you can send a chat to Beth Roy, who has added technical support to the beginning of her name. Thank you, Beth, for your help. We encourage you to use the reaction buttons as well. On the right-hand side of the menu on the bottom of your screen, there's a little smiley face with the word reactions. There are several options there, and you can provide feedback during today's session using those emojis. We won't be taking questions today, so you shouldn't need to use the raise hand function. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Jackson, the Executive Director of Vital Communities, to start our program.
Thank you, Becky. Welcome once again to this two-part childcare symposium. Over 130 people registered for this event, a clear indication of how important this topic is. Today's audience includes businesses, nonprofit organizations, state legislators, town officials, policy advocates, philanthropists, childcare providers, and parents. We're honored that you're here, and we hope that you'll continue to join us as we seek to tackle the childcare crisis in the Upper Valley. As many of you know, childcare is a new area of focus for Vital Communities. We decided to take it on after hearing this past year from three groups with which we are closely associated. The corporate council that we facilitate, comprised of the region's largest employers, the municipal leaders with whom we meet regularly, and the economic development professionals and financial institutions whom we've brought together since the start of the pandemic. Each of these groups are worried about how the lack of high quality, affordable childcare is compromising the economic vitality of the region. And each requested that Vital Communities convene stakeholders from the variety of sectors impacted by the crisis so that we could learn together and explore solutions that can either be strengthened or launched. In saying yes to those requests, we knew that we had to draw on the expertise of those who are working on this issue every day. We are delighted to have had input from a wide range of partners. Amy Brooks from the Early Care and Education Association of the Upper Valley, Becky Parton from Dartmouth-Hitchcock, Brooke Couch-Freeland from the Couch Family Foundation, Sarah Kobolensky from the Corporate Council, as well as Sean Mulholland and Christine Benner from the City of Lebanon and the town of Newport, respectively. I'm deeply grateful for their unflagging assistance in planning these events and for the outstanding speakers that they have lined up for our sessions. One of the major themes that emerged from our planning discussions is how this issue is impacting everyone in the region, not just people with children and their employers. I no longer need childcare, but I'm nevertheless impacted when my favorite restaurants reduce their hours because their wait staff can't find childcare, or when an elderly neighbor can't get medical treatment at the local hospital because the doctors and nurses there can't find childcare. We are all touched by this crisis. Another theme that emerged from our planning discussions is how complex the childcare crisis is. I'm sure that many of you have heard the refrain, we just need to create more childcare centers to increase the number of slots available. But unfortunately, the answer is not so simple. In fact, because of the severe shortage of current and potential childcare professionals, opening a new center and offering above market salaries to attract staff will only rob other centers of their staff, creating disruptions elsewhere. It's therefore imperative that we consider upstream issues, that we push for systems change, and that we work collaboratively, because this problem is bigger than any one organization or company. These are the reasons that Vital Communities is convening this symposium. We hope that today's session will result in a collective understanding of the many facets of this issue, thereby setting the stage for exploring solutions and opportunities when we meet again later this month. I'll now turn it back to Becky Parton to talk more about what's in store for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm Becky Parton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker with the Dartmouth Trauma Intervention Research Center. I'm the co-director of the Upper Valley Project Launch, which is a 5-year SAMHSA grant. One of our main focuses is helping kids and families get what they need so they can be healthy and thrive. As we've all learned during the pandemic, childcare is a crucial building block of our economy and a core component of meeting the needs of families. This has always been true, but the need has become more apparent as families haven't been able to access quality, affordable care in an equitable way. We want to start by asking some polling questions so you can all get a sense of who's in the room and what you're experiencing personally. Our first question is, who are you? You can check off more than one answer here. Doreen is going to share the poll, and we're going to give you about 30 seconds to answer the poll, and then we're going to close it so you can see what people have said. Again, you can check off more than one thing here. When you're done, you just hit the submit button, and Doreen's going to keep tabs on how many people have answered the poll.
We're at about 90% now. We can let it run for a few more seconds.
Sounds good. Go ahead and submit your answers, and then Doreen will close the poll and share the results with us. Thanks, Doreen. All right, so you can sort of see who's in the room. A good chunk of people are affiliated with an organization that's tackling childcare. Some of you are parents or work in the childcare field. A lot of you are listed as employees. We have a couple elected officials, municipal leaders, people that previously used childcare, and some people that don't fit into any of those categories, but probably are affected by that. You can go ahead and hit close, and we're going to do a second poll, and we're going to ask you, how concerned are you about childcare in the Upper Valley? So Doreen will put up that second poll. We'll do the same thing. We'll give you about 30 seconds to answer that poll. Hold on. It always takes us a second to do this, so just bear with us while we pull up the poll. There we go. On a scale of 1 to 5, how concerned are you about affordability and access, is what it should say, in the Upper Valley? Again, we'll give people another 10 or 15 seconds maybe to fill out the poll. There we go. So 75% of people in the room rated it as very concerned, pretty high concern, which makes sense, right? That's why we're all here today. So thank you, Doreen, for helping us with those polls. We'll have a few more throughout today. We're also, as we move into introductions, I'm going to invite you to add your thoughts about what you want to get out of today's session into the chat, and Beth will add a prompt in the chat. You can feel free to keep those rolling as we move into the next sessions and next pieces of the session. This is the first of a 2-part symposium. Our goal for today is to frame the issue. We invited guest speakers who have firsthand experience with the childcare crisis and who could share with you the impact that it has had. We will hear the challenges that various members of our community are facing, what the data is telling us, and what policymaking barriers are being confronted. You're welcome to put questions in the chat today, but we won't have time for a live Q&A. We will summarize the notes and send out resources after today. And any questions you ask, we can either ask specific presenters to answer later, or we will try to address in our second session. We will also be sending you a brief evaluation after today, where you can ask further questions or suggest topics. Our second session is scheduled for Wednesday, November 17th, also from 8 to 9:30. We'll spend more time in that session talking about what local groups are already doing, what other communities have done nationally, and to get feedback on what we think we could do more of here in the Upper Valley. That session will include time for breakout rooms and discussions, so we hope you can join us for that as well. We'll send a follow-up survey after the second session as well, just to gauge interest in work groups and convenings beyond this to continue to address the issue. We hope that these two sessions will lay the groundwork for individual, business level, and policy level change, but we know that we won't solve the problem that quickly. So we invite you to think about your role personally and professionally in helping to address the childcare crisis in our community. Like Sarah said, childcare impacts all of us, whether you have a child under the age of 5 or not. As business leaders, employers, employees, city and town officials, parents, you've all seen firsthand the crippling effect a lack of childcare has on the rest of the sectors of the economy. This fall, the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute released a report that largely attributed the state's labor shortage to childcare. And prior to COVID, the available licensed childcare spots for children ages 0 to 6 was only 60% of what was needed for families. The numbers in Vermont are similar, where 3 out of 5 infants don't have access to regulated, high-quality childcare. We know that the first 5 years of life are critical for brain development in children, and events and environments during this time can have lifelong impacts. Quality, affordable childcare has multiple layers of benefit. For children, it provides a safe, supportive environment to develop and grow, which will ultimately lead to better life outcomes, better academic achievement, and potential to succeed in the workplace. Improve social skills and the ability to get along well with others, stronger social emotional learning that will help the child regulate their emotions and ultimately become a well-rounded adult. For families, high quality, affordable childcare means peace of mind, the ability to work if they want to, having an extended village to help raise their child, and less stress in other areas of their life. For businesses and employers, high quality, affordable, and dependable childcare means having a workforce that is available to do the job, that is less stressed and more productive. During the next 20 to 30 minutes, we'll hear from employers, a parent, and a child care center professional about how the crisis is impacting them. Hopefully we've set it up so you can see the speakers in a larger window, but if not, you can switch it to speaker view on your end by clicking on view in the top right-hand corner of your screen and moving to speaker view. I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, Jenny Levy, who is the Executive Vice President of People, Community, and Environment at Hypertherm and President of the Hypertherm Hope Foundation in Hanover, New Hampshire, where she has worked for 17 years in various roles. Jenny will discuss how Hypertherm has lost staff because they've lost childcare, and she'll share other challenges this employee-owned company is facing as a result of the childcare crisis in the region. Each of our speakers only has 5 minutes, so I'm gonna introduce Jenny and thank you for being with us today. And if you go too much over 5 minutes, I'll just give you a warning. Thanks so much for being with us, Jenny.
No problem. Thank you so much, Becky. And thank you so much to Vital Communities and the Couch Family Foundation for convening this really important topic. So as Becky said, I represent today Hypertherm, where we have 1,200 people in the Upper Valley here and 1,900 total globally. The hiring crisis in a low employment environment is only accentuated by the lack of access to childcare. The way that we've seen that is we've hired over 200 people here in the Upper Valley to Hypertherm this year. We've also promoted over 200 people within our organization to new positions as well, which is one of our commitments. But in that process of trying to hire 200 people, what we have found is that people will ask us, especially if they're coming into the region or returning to the workforce, what advice we have for finding childcare. We refer them into networks and such, but there are very few spots that we are able to connect them to. Additionally, we have people who luckily are expanding and growing their families who are already here. And so another area that we really see some crisis and some stress is when people are having children, current associates are having children, and they start to network around and start to ask about where could they find a childcare spot for their baby that's coming. We see that from all genders, by the way, people who are just part of a family expansion. And that's caused a lot of stress for people because they need their job, they love their career, and then they are worried, incredibly worried about their ability to continue to pursue their career and find childcare. So those two kind of decision-making points are huge for us. In terms of closing childcare, this was especially acute in the middle of the pandemic, obviously. What we saw there, though, was it was daycare centers that were closing or reducing their capacity. That was an issue. We are an essential manufacturer, so our associates had access to slots, to limited slots in the middle of the pandemic. But what we saw is that the capacity was getting constrained on the daycare centers, and expenses were changing as well. That caused stress. Additionally, we saw people, and frankly, more of our associates rely on neighbors and family and friends for childcare because it's cheaper, because it's a known quantity and it's closer to them and their partner, their home. So that's actually more of our associate base. What we saw there, it's not quite daycare there, it's not, sorry, childcare centers, it is daycare though, is that a lot of the people that we're relying upon are elderly. So especially in the heart of the pandemic, which we're coming out of now with vaccinations, people's elderly carer no longer took care of their children. So the way that that showed up for us is we started having people using some paid time we were making available for the pandemic when childcare was no longer available. We continued to pay people because of that constraint. So we saw people using that time. We also saw then parents who are both on first shift or second shift start to split shifts. So what that means for us is that one parent would move to third shift and another parent would go to first shift or stay on first shift. And so that's how a family would accommodate it. That might not, they didn't leave the workforce, but the impact that that has is that third shift associate goes home at 7 a.m. and takes care of children throughout the whole day. So their sleep cycle and their access to rest and care is highly constrained. So what we've seen is then quality of work, quality of health and well-being decline. That's a way to save money, but it was also a way to just keep the family unit employed across both parents. We saw some families not be able to make that choice, especially parents of children with special needs. So that was a huge constraint as well for several parents. As people pointed out to me, that's not just children under 5. Any child with some special needs any child of any age with certain special needs, it's as if they're under 5. So that's another category that we have a set of parents contending with the ongoing care needs, again, in a special needs environment as well. So overall, we've seen some people leave our workplace. We've seen some people not return from maternity leave. We've seen a high degree of stress at all of those life change points. And we've seen families under increased stress to create coverage for themselves and also needing to choose non-licensed. I would say it's good quality because it's cozy, it's close by, it's someone they know and trust, but at the same time, in terms of early education, early development principles that I know many of the people on this call are passionate about, those aren't always being put forward in home care environments. And that is by far the biggest way that our associates are getting coverage for their youngest children. Becky, hopefully that helps a bit, add some color.
Yes, you touched on a lot of points there, right? You talked a little bit about what your organization was able to do to support families, but that even with the things that you did, families still struggled. So thank you for sharing that. Next, we're going to hear from Joseph Blair, who is a human resources manager at Ruger. Joseph has over 15 years experience in human resources and related work. And Ruger, which also includes round-the-clock shifts, has experienced challenges with hiring because applicants can't find childcare even for the standard shifts. So thanks for being with us, Joseph.
Good morning, and thank you for I'm assuming I'm off mute. Good morning, and thanks for having me. It's a pretty big honor to be asked to speak on this topic. Yes, my name is Joseph Blair. I'm with Ruger here in Newport, A lot of similar numbers and situations that Jenny spoke of. So I'll try not to echo too much, but it's tough not to, because a lot of the issues are the same we're having here. We have about 800 associates here in Newport. It's a smaller community, but a very tight knit and tight community. So a lot of the childcare issues that Jenny spoke of, relying on family, has been an integral part as well. I was asked to speak about hiring, and I can touch on some other things too, but I'll try and cram it all into 5 minutes and be respectful of that. We've been holding hiring events for the past probably year or so solid, even going back further, but within the past year. Again, we're also an essential manufacturer in the area, and so we've been going full steam, but been trying to navigate these waters, which have been pretty tricky. But with those hiring events, we've been hiring about a little less than what Jenny mentioned, so about probably 150, 175 associates in the past year or so. And there's been challenges with that. And in those events, we actually do on-site interviews and job offers in the moment. So some hard numbers, relatively hard numbers. When we have these events, we talk through the shifts and their benefits and everything that's available. And we probably have three candidates, per month turn down the offer because of childcare issues and the shifts available. We've been very flexible, and this time has caused some pretty good reflection back on inwards of ourselves. And being manufacturing is pretty traditional. You have pretty tight schedules and such. We've been able to recognize the need for flexibility. So some of the things we have done is input some flexible shifts, trying to accommodate. We have some of the paid PTO that Jenny's mentioned as well. And so we're trying to accommodate and work with associates, but it's still very difficult because of the challenges they face. And these are some young candidates that could have a pretty big career ahead of them, and awesome careers. And they've had to say no because of available childcare and the shifts available, or the shifts and the timing and such. So it's been pretty unfortunate, but about 3 a month. So that's about over the past 12 months, just conservatively, 3 times 12, some pretty big numbers there of candidates that we've lost due to the childcare issue. I think some of that also we've had, and being a tight knit community, we have spouses and husband, wives, or partners that work here. And they've had to make those hard decisions and had to either, similar to what Jenny's mentioned, a hypertherm. Fortunately, we have alternate shifts they can go to. And some of them have just opted because of cost of childcare, the impact on their mental well-being, their sleep cycles, all of those things. We've lost some really good career-minded associates as well. And it's been pretty unfortunate. One of the other things I think wasn't mentioned yet was the flexibility and the need for not only the affordability and availability, but the flexibility of childcare, especially during school time when these symptoms pop up and kids are sent home during the pandemic. We're working with associates to provide that flexibility, but it still impacts them because they're missing time from work, missing training time, missing lost wages, whatever the case may be, without that available childcare for those symptoms there as well. And that could be a little tricky because of the symptoms and such, but that's created a whole other dynamic to this issue, and it's been tough to navigate. And the stresses on the associates has been pretty great. And I think that's probably one of the big takeaways. Is one of them. I think there's many. Is with the added stress that on the associates who are tending for their children, trying to provide the safe environment, and then with their changes in sleep, the stresses, all of those things, and coming in and working in an environment, and the quality of work, their own personal safety, their own personal mental health has been a huge impact. We've seen an uptick in our use of our EAP program, trying to work with associates a lot more, linking folks back to available, mental health care providers for them in the community as well. And I think that's probably a larger drain, because when these folks aren't able to provide for their families, their careers, and their benefits here that they would be able to get in a full-time position, then they're forced to look elsewhere. And that's probably some sort of state assistance, not only for childcare, but just for additional medical benefits and other things to help get them through day to day and week to week. So I think there's some downstream financial burden on the state as well that, we could, I think Sarah mentioned it earlier with this upstream view, we could really impact the system downstream as well. So that's all I've got, I think. So.
Thank you, Joe. I know it sounds like we're framing the issues here, so it's not always positive, but I did hear both you and Jenny talk about things like paid time off, flexible shifts, and EAP programs. So hopefully we can keep that in mind for the second session as things that employers can do to help support their workforce. We have one more poll here. We're going to ask for those of you that are employers, what have been your experiences? I know not everyone in the room is an employer, but for those of you that are, which of these have you experienced in your workplace? And we'll give you 20 to 30 seconds to fill this out. And if you're not an employer, you can just hit the X in the top right-hand corner. And Doreen, we're going to have much lower numbers on this one. So you give people a couple more seconds. All right, thank you. So a lot of employers saying adjusting staff working hours. People definitely seeing the things that we're hearing, losing staff because of childcare, unable to hire people because of childcare, thinking about subsidizing childcare costs. Some people have thought about an on-site childcare center, and a few of you have surveyed your staff about childcare needs. So we're going to be keeping these poll results and sharing them with people afterwards as well. So don't feel like you need to take screenshots or keep track of any of those things. We're going to switch gears from the employer impact to the parent impact. So we have a video that was pre-recorded from a parent who has struggled with childcare challenges in the last year. This story is not unique. There are plenty of you in the audience and hundreds of families in our own community who have been impacted by this. Some families lost childcare because of the pandemic, others haven't had consistent care, and there are plenty who haven't been able to find new care. And then you add in all the impacts of COVID itself with quarantines and classrooms shutting down temporarily, that it becomes really difficult for families. So Doreen is going to queue up a video from Rebecca Owens, who works for the City of Lebanon.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Owens. I am Associate Planner for the City of Lebanon, New Hampshire. Please excuse the background scenery. I am on parental leave right now. I gave birth to our son Holden about 7 weeks ago. Here's Holden. He's taking a nap in his favorite spot. So on Labor Day, and I returned to work after my 12-week leave at the end of November. So at that point, my husband and I will be in need of full-time childcare. And my husband actually didn't get any leave, so he can't piggyback on when I start work again and help out. We're going to need help right away. So when we found out we were going to have a child, people did say to start looking for childcare. I think at the same time it was around the 2020 pandemic, and people were also saying it was going to be a bust year with babies. So we really underestimated the demand for such services in the Upper Valley in the end. And even though about halfway through my pregnancy, we started to contact people, I think we were given some false overtones, not understanding the depth of the need. And when they said call back in September, we were shocked to hear that a place like River Valley Fit Kids had a wait list of 80 children. So what had sounded optimistic earlier in the year was suddenly much more dire, and started to hear of not quite that length of wait lists, but wait lists left and right wherever we called. Furthermore, very few places take infants, so you have a limited number. And it's not even a matter of cost now, it's just who has openings. So it seems that Vermont has some better options than New Hampshire. I don't know if that has anything to do with state policies or incentives for such programs, but certainly in Lebanon, there's a dearth of childcare facilities with licensing. You can find some names of places on directories, both for Vermont and New Hampshire, but there's nothing comprehensive for either independent providers and in-home providers. There are Facebook group pages you can try to network with people on, but I think that what I'm getting at is, for anyone, it's going to be an intensive research project and intensive budget item, no matter what they do, unless they have family who can help with their children, or they're able to take time off or reduce their hours. My husband and I can't afford to do that. Can't even to temporarily remove ourselves from the workforce is not desirable. And at the same time, we want safe, high quality care for our son. So, I mean, people talk about the affordability of housing in the Upper Valley, but childcare here would cost more than our mortgage even. And I'm just going to say that again. Childcare here will cost as much or more than our mortgage. So, and that was for a mortgage before the pandemic. Now home prices are even higher here. So, it's not a sustainable thing. We are now in a mindset that we have to prepare for when he's a 1 or 2 year old and get on wait list for then. And recommend that for anyone listening here as well. The other thing I'll say is, to have to commute is something a lot of people do, for whether it's for work or daycare, but that's easily 2 hours out of your day when you consider 1 hour each way. The wear and tear, you're sleep deprived as it is, it's not safe. It's an extra cost. It's hours that you don't have on top of an 8-hour, 9-hour work day. And then you might see your child for 1 or 2 hours in the evening after that, before they need to go to bed. It's really not ideal to have to travel far for childcare. I think that matter of convenience has really struck me as well. Really hope that Lebanon can work on, with its partners, some better local solutions. It's great that some employers have FSAs, but money in this world is just part of the need to the solution. We need more facilities, more workers, better pay for the workers, and more assistance for employees. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say. There's obviously more to it than that. And thank you for listening. Feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
We want to thank Rebecca for recording that. Again, a lot of themes there. We want to do a poll now to see, for those of you in the audience who are parents, what have you experienced? And it could be similar things to what Rebecca has said. Could be something you heard one of the employers say. And not everyone in the room is currently a parent, but if you have experienced any of these, please feel free to do the poll. And if this doesn't apply to you, you can just hit the X in the top right-hand corner. We'll give people just a few more seconds to fill that out, maybe 10 seconds. And I see there's some great stuff in the chat. Feel free to keep putting comments and questions in the chat. Doreen's sharing the responses here. A good majority of the parents in the room are saying they've had to change their hours or reduce their hours. The other things, it looks like some people are saying their employers have tried some innovative ways to help support them. So that's great news. I'm also seeing that in the chat, people talking about how employers have been trying to address this childcare crisis. So that's a great first step. All right. We are going to now hear from some people who work in childcare. The first is a childcare center director, Jen Parker, who works with Creative Kids Adventures, which has locations in Grantham, New Hampshire and Hartford, Vermont. So Jen, I'm sure you have plenty to say about the challenges you're facing on the childcare end about providing high quality and affordable care. So thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you all for being a part of this important conversation today and in recognizing the current crisis that childcare programs are in. I've been in this field for over 20 years, and throughout these years, our profession has always faced its struggles, mostly with accessing resources, recognition, and benefits that our school professionals receive. We've worked hard over the years to advocate for our profession and to bring resources to our programs and teachers, including affordable opportunities to further education and advance our teachers in the field. But only recently through COVID has childcare begun to be recognized as an essential workforce that supports the availability or the ability for families to work and businesses to continue to be staffed with working parents. You're all aware of the current staffing crisis that our nation is facing, but I'm here to tell you that childcare centers are facing a serious catastrophe with a lack of early childhood educators entering our field. In recent years, high schools have stopped offering human services programs for students, and these were feeder programs for our industry. Young adults were being introduced to the early childhood field, and colleges have also stopped or significantly reduced the courses they offer centered around early childhood because it was believed that these teachers do not make enough to support student loans and make affordable living. Over the past nearly 2 years that we've been living through COVID, we have seen a lot of teachers leaving the field. In the beginning, it was because everyone was asked to stay home and stay safe. And as the pandemic has continued, teachers have not returned to the field and programs are losing more and more of our workforce. Those that were previously working in our programs are now being hired as nannies by families who can afford to pay privately. Additionally, many Black market in-home childcare programs are being opened up with previous early childhood teachers staying home and taking children into their homes and providing care. Many of these new in-home programs are unregulated and likely not in compliance with state licensing regulations. These programs are what the state had worked so hard to eliminate to ensure children in these programs were safe and the providers were following safety rules and regulations. For each teacher that leaves a state regulated program, either is hired as a nanny or is now doing care at home, that's 5 to 15 children that centers are no longer able to care for. So think about that for a minute. For one person that's not working in childcare anymore, that's 5 to 15 children, 5 to 15 families that we can no longer provide care for. If we are campaigning to provide equitable early childhood education for children birth through age 5, then how can we do so if our workforce is being depleted by higher income families retaining our staff as private nannies or these unregulated home providers? Programs are left to turn away families who can't afford such privileges, and now we're left to find other, perhaps unsafe alternatives for their children. Personally speaking, our center has lost about half of the original teachers that we had at the beginning of the pandemic. Throughout the first year of COVID, we did not have to reduce our hours or our capacity because families were home with their children, and only for a short time to reduce the hours, and that was for cleaning purposes to make sure that we were keeping everyone safe. Only recently have we truly felt the staffing crisis and the burden, and it really is a crisis. We've had to reduce the number of children that we have allowed into our program by 20 to 25 children. And we've had to shorten our hours to ensure that teachers get breaks throughout the day and that we're meeting ratios and have the coverage to provide those breaks. We don't have the extra staff to grant our teachers any time off. So we've been forced to close for a week to give them the much needed rest that they deserve. Our site director is now a teacher in the classroom, leaving her to do her office work late into the evenings, and she's burning out quickly. If we lose one more teacher, we will be forced to close a classroom and tell 10 families they no longer have childcare. All attempts in posting jobs have been unanswered. Currently, our program has 5 teacher positions open, and if we were able to fill these positions, we could return to our regular hours of operation and welcome those 20 to 25 students and families back to our center, allowing 20 to 25 potential employees to return to the workforce. The childcare market is more competitive than it has ever been in the past. Programs with higher budgets are offering new starting wages that smaller programs or nonprofit programs can't compete with. Benefits are more of a concern for teachers coming into the workforce, something that we've never had to deal with in the past. Sign-on bonuses are being offered, yet still do not seem to be gaining attention of job seekers. Everyone is desperately seeking teachers to the point that we are now competitively bidding against one another, and some programs may be poaching staff from other centers. Our field is in a state of an emergency, and something needs to be done quickly before more centers close and the lack of available, safe childcare continues to grow. As more centers close and more families are turned away, more companies are also going to begin to fail due to employees having to stay home with their children. Support is needed to get our teachers back in the workforce and out of private homes. Support is needed in providing equitable pay and benefits for early childhood educators like our school educators receive. Support is needed in getting the human resource programs and college courses back into schools to promote our field as an essential and rewarding profession. I thank you all for listening, and I look forward to how we can all contribute and brainstorm ways to strengthen our vulnerable childcare industry.
Thank you, Jen. I know this is a really hard time for centers, so we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. We asked an employee from a childcare center to pre-record some remarks, knowing that there is this shortage of staff in the classrooms. So thank you to Danielle Burrows from the Children's Center of the Upper Valley, who's going to speak to what it's been like trying to provide care to children during this really stressful time.
My name is Danielle. I've been in early childhood for 15 years. While one would think that we've possibly seen everything, nothing is harder than facing a pandemic while trying to support working parents and serve our community by providing quality childcare in a safe, secure, healthy environment. Our visions of seeing a community that thrives when its family's needs are met and when the children are developing a lifelong love of learning, fostered by the earliest teachers, met its biggest threat of COVID. Amidst the initial shock of what was happening in the world around us, what that meant for our families and the children we take care of hit like a ton of bricks. Do we stay to continue care for our essential parents? Do we leave to take care of our own children? What if we bring something home to our families? Some of my closest coworkers were living in multi-generational homes. What did that mean? Not only was this a mental battle of what ifs, but if became more widespread, trying to determine who could support who while being diligent and following the federal, state, and local guidance. Some left the workplace because they didn't feel safe, some scared of all the unknowns. Some didn't have a choice because they didn't have help raising their own children. But we were faced with the schools being closed, our children of various ages at home with no parental supervision. Working closely with colleagues, it was easy to see the threat of mental health make a strong appearance. Staff that was once reliable became unreliable, putting those who continued to work full-time facing longer hours, having no other choice than being flexible, and in some cases, burnout. I think it is definitely safe to say that even with hazard pay, for those centers who were able to provide that for their employees, it was the fact that we all just entered instability, whether it be financial instability, mental instability, or housing. The unknown began to put a lot of weight on everyone's plate of life. Reaching out to fill the positions for those who couldn't stay on board became stagnant. Instead of even just a few resumes and interviews happening, we had crickets. There was nothing. We have a field that is incredibly hard to find individuals to join our team. And even still, it's harder. Putting a strain of keeping our classrooms safe, clean, in order, expected to keep our kids and families safe, ensuring that we are doing our due diligence to keep germs at bay. Extra hours needing to clean takes away from our quality time with the children. Limiting our quality time with them leads to gaps. Those gaps can be defined as ensuring the mental health of our youngest is taken care of and giving them the most love to get them through the stress of all the adults around them. Children are the most vulnerable between birth and age 3, which is the average age of most childcare centers in the Upper Valley. Keeping the mental health of everyone in mind is the highest priority and so critical in establishing and maintaining healthy relationships and environments. My husband and I have talked tirelessly about the fact that we couldn't afford to not work, yet we are facing the struggles of continuing to work, teetering on the thought of financial instability, and knowing that even 10 cents could take us down and break us getting through this pandemic. Working full-time to ensure our families have their needs met and their children be somewhere to enable them to stay afloat became easier. More children were enrolling despite of what was happening in the bigger world. Following guidance and policies has been an unbelievable struggle. Anyone who knows children knows how frequently they can be sick with just a common cold. We don't come into early childhood with a medical degree. Our job is to educate and nurture and follow policies and guidance. Being consistent across the board, even when we may think a child may have a common cold, was out of the question. Being an educator in this position to call parents at the slightest sign of an ill child became harder and harder. Every time I reach out to a family, I dread knowing how the cycle works. Calling the parents, they miss work, putting them in instability because we have to dismiss their children. It's not just a phone call. It's the wondering if they have time off to cover this dismissal. It's wondering if the employer is understanding. It's wondering if they're going to be okay to handle yet another absence. In some cases, going through a pandemic with one of the most essential nurturing jobs is no easy feat. It's more than just a paycheck. Teachers don't teach to make $1 million. They teach and hope to make an impact on 1 million people. Being part of the same employment community for the long haul has provided itself timeless throughout this endeavor. Having health insurance, paid time off, education dollars, they've all been kicked into overtime, being used more than ever, and for that, I am beyond grateful.
Thank you to Danielle for pre-recording that. I know this is an emotional topic, and the people who work in this field are very passionate about the children that they serve. So I love her nugget about people don't do this work for $1 million, but to serve 1 million people, right? That the people who are doing this work really do want to help children and families. I'm seeing in the chat, people are having some great back and forth. And I know that what we're doing today is really framing the issue, right? So we're talking about all the doom and gloom and all the negative things that are happening. We're starting to talk about some of those nuggets of things we can pull out. And in our second session, we'll do more brainstorming and talking about, so what are we going to do next? I want to thank all the speakers who've been talking so far, who've taken the time out of their day to share their personal stories and experiences. Each of those stories is part of this larger landscape that's impacting kids and families in our bi-state region. So we've invited Dr. Jess Carson to share some regional data about the childcare crisis. Dr. Carson is a research assistant professor with the Vulnerable Families Research Program at the UNH Carsey School of Public Policy. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Carson.
Thank you so much for having me. I am going to share some slides with you if you'll be patient for just a moment. I think I can pull them up. And while I am doing that, I just wanted to acknowledge the support and the long-term partnership that I have had in doing this work, in particular with the Couch Family Foundation and with lots of partners around the state that have kind of been part of this great conversation. So I'm really excited to be able to share some data with you today. I will just say up front, I don't expect that this will take a terribly long time because there will be no news to you in this slideshow, really just sort of serving to illustrate that the information that folks have shared with us today, the stories, they're not just anecdote, they are really backed up by the data, that these are real things that are happening in the community and that we're able to quantify that, but certainly there'll be no surprises in what I'm going to describe from the data today. So I thought I would just give a quick overview of the numbers in the Upper Valley in terms of the demand for childcare or the potential demand. There are about 9,500 children in the Upper Valley under age 5. 70% of those children live in families where all available parents are in the labor force. So that means both parents if they live in a married parent household or a 2-parent household, and that the single parent works if they live in a 1-parent household. So that's about 6,600 kids who are in need of some kind of care, whether that's formal childcare or, as we've heard, the kind of kin care, neighbor care, family care, which are often the more kind of feasible and affordable and available options for many of our families. I wanted to highlight in particular that we had a couple of Upper Valley data points. So one of the projects that we did in partnership with the Couch Family Foundation back in 2017-18 involved asking a whole host of Upper Valley parents who were employed to tell us more about their childcare needs and their childcare priorities. And when we asked more than 700 Upper Valley parents whether childcare was necessary, it was clear across the board that they need childcare in order to remain employed. It was not an optional expense or activity for the families that we had spoken with across the board. In terms of the landscape itself, recent data from the summer and fall from both the states of New Hampshire and Vermont show that there are 197 licensed or registered providers in the Upper Valley with a capacity of over 5,000 slots. So if we recall just one slide back, we saw that there are 6,600 kids potentially in need of some kind of care, and we have about 500 slots. So right here, we see that we have a sort of gap that already exists. This snapshot number, this 2021 number, does represent a 12% loss in providers and about a 2% loss in slots since we last analyzed the data in 2017. And while it's not a huge shrinkage in slots overall, I do really want to highlight that what that means is that there are fewer choices for families, and that's really important, as we heard from lots of our speakers that came before me, that people need care that fits their schedules, that fits their work commute patterns, that works for their family. And if we have fewer and fewer choices available, that really constrains what families are able to do in terms of participating in the workforce and getting the care that they need in order to do that. And as we've heard, of course, just because a licensed or registered slot exists, that doesn't mean that it's always necessarily fillable because of our staffing constraints, which many of the on-the-ground folks have highlighted before. A quick snapshot of some of the vacancy data that were most recently available. So in the Vermont side of the Upper Valley, we did not have equivalent data for New Hampshire. We see that there are really slim shares of providers who were reporting any vacancies in 2021, and that, as some of our prior speakers have illustrated, that the vacancies among the youngest child serving providers are especially slim. So we had just 1 in 20 infant providers were reporting that they had any vacancies. And in particular, that it's not an especially large number of vacancies. So those 3 providers that reported some infant vacancies equated to slots, open slots for 4 infants across a 2-county span of the Upper Valley. So 3 providers may have had openings, but between the 3, or among the 3 of them, it was only for 4 babies, which is really, of course, not going to be keeping pace with the needs in the region. So of course, why is childcare supply so constrained? Well, as we've discussed, it's a very labor-intensive business model, and we need lots of staff so that we can meet licensing requirements and provide the kind of care, education, and supervision that children need. And in order to do that, we would like to pay childcare workforce a reasonable living wage. But anything close to that becomes kind of reaching the breaking point for what families can pay. We can't really offset those wages by out-of-pocket family tuition. And we have this sort of added layer that, knowing the importance of early learning, which we've had the opportunity to build a really good and deep literature on over the last several decades, we know how important early learning is. And accordingly, we've tried to increase this sort of quality of care, meaning that workers are asked to take on more education and training requirements, but the wages haven't grown to keep pace with that. And at a national level, we've seen that the workforce has shrunk by more than 100,000 childcare workers, which, as we heard from our colleagues on this call, that really equates to an exponential number of children and families who can't be served now because of this shrinkage in the childcare workforce. Just to really contextualize this for us about what that means, that childcare workers are underpaid, we do see in these two sort of portions, the southern Vermont side of the border and the west, central southwest New Hampshire side of the border. So these are the geographies where the data are available and most closely aligned with the Upper Valley region, that annual wages of childcare workers are $30,000 to $35,000. And if workers in those regions wanted to move up to a higher paying occupation, couriers and messengers in that part of New Hampshire make more than childcare workers, and printing press operators in the Vermont side of the border make more than childcare workers. And it's not that those aren't good jobs or valuable jobs, but that we really need to think about the educational and training ask that we place on the childcare workforce and how we're going to be able to compensate that accordingly. And as we've heard from some of the families on the call and the providers here as well, what happens when workers don't have childcare? Well, they do all sorts of things, but many of those things equate to reducing their labor supply. The pandemic has provided a really good illustration of this. It's not a pandemic-induced issue, but it is an illustration of the issue that particularly women's labor force capacity sort of shrinks to respond to childcare capacity constraints. And I'm glad that we talked a little bit about equity, because these do have equity implications, that women in lower income families, that women of color are more likely to sort of feel the effects of these kinds of disruptions more deeply and more disproportionately. And then some analysis of recent data collected in September and October of 2021 by the US Census Bureau shows that 25% of New England households that have at least one child under age 12 reported experiencing a childcare disruption in the past 4 weeks. So this is not something that happened, just fall or sort of as the pandemic was at its kind of peak in 2020, but this is something that's still happening for people and they're still experiencing with some regularity. And when the Census Bureau asked, which of the following things did you do? How did you respond to that childcare loss in the past 4 weeks? And 1 in 10 New England households with a young child either cut their hours or left their job or didn't seek work. So they somehow reduced their labor supply. As we've heard from employers on the call, people are using leave, paid or unpaid, to care for children. And then 1 in 20 households with a child under 12, they just multitask and they supervise their children while they were working, which of course is not an option for all workers. And in any case, even when it is an option, really doesn't lend itself to workers being able to be their best selves at work while they're also trying to multitask and care for their children as well. And then I really just wanted to highlight, as we all know on this call, that this is not a new issue. It's not a pandemic era issue, that these are entrenched issues and persistent. And while we'll hopefully hear a little bit in the end of this symposium and in the next one about some of the policy solutions, that this is going to require some long-term investments to really be able to turn this kind of structural issue around, rather than kind of the Band-Aid one-shot investment solutions. And I know that there are great folks on both sides of the border that are really thinking strategically about that. So it's going to be very exciting to see where we land on some of these pieces. Thank you very much for letting me share some data with you today, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carson. And as I put in the chat, we will be sharing Dr. Carson's slides, and you'll all have a copy of today's presentation after today. We hope that, again, you keep thinking about your role in all of this, whether you're a parent, an employee, or an employer. Keep using the chat for those comments. We're going to synthesize the comments and be taking that into consideration for part 2 of the symposium. We're going to now talk about policy. So there's been some references to local policies, some state level policies, federal policies, and we wanted to invite some speakers to talk about what is happening in New Hampshire and Vermont. So we have 2 groups, one from New Hampshire, one from Vermont. Our first speaker is Christina D'Alessandro. She's the former New Hampshire State Director for Moms Rising up until last week or so, where she worked to advance issues relevant to women and their families, both on a national and a state level. And this week, Christina started a new position with the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation as Director for Early Childhood and Family Supports, where she is advising on issues facing women and children. So Christina, welcome. We're excited to hear your perspective on what's happening in New Hampshire.
Thank you. And I'm really excited to be here today. And I really will say this event has just put such a really personal and tangible face on everything that families and employers are facing. So I'm really happy to be a part of it and hope that we can work together to come up with some solutions. So I'm just going to pop up my slideshow and hopefully this will work. Are you seeing it? Okay, excellent. So first of all, once again, I was sitting as in the advocate chair until about a week ago, where I moved into this new role at the Charitable Foundation. And I think it's really a great time to sort of both shift the thinking in terms of what is happening in a policy level and what we need to continue to do and advocate for, as well as moving that into some more deep thinking about long term. So I'm going to give you sort of a little bit of, here we go, a history of investment for childcare in New Hampshire. And I know that my Vermont colleagues will speak later on and can report on some sort of better successes, but it's been a bit of a challenge here in New Hampshire to date. I think we've had traditionally limited state investment, pretty much just enough to ensure we're able to maximize what the federal government is putting forward. And with our high cost of living, we actually have a fairly high threshold for people to be able to access and utilize childcare scholarship, but we have an incredible amount of underutilization of this benefit. There are a number of reasons for that. I think there are challenges in access, some confusion around eligibility, but it's somewhat of a tragedy that here we have this high threshold that should enable more families to access this benefit, and yet we consistently have underutilization of the program. We equally have no state investment in pre-K. And although when we talk about preschool investment, how that is delivered really matters, the fact that New Hampshire has no state allocation and one of only 6 states to not have any is really relevant, because this represents more money coming into the childcare system. And once again, how we do that, what that looks like on the ground really matters. But the fact that there isn't currently no state investment certainly has New Hampshire standing out along with the other 6 states, one of whom is actually actively working towards providing some active pre-K. We recently received a PDG grant, which is named a preschool development grant, though it really wasn't looking at preschool access here. It was looking at systems change. And Governor Sununu in the past 2 years created the Council for Thriving Children. So there seemed to be some movement and certainly some endorsement at the executive level, but has not traditionally been a great amount of investment in the state. Well, then COVID came. And I think COVID represented such a significant shift. And we were lucky to a governor who had, I think, an understanding of the importance of childcare. And we have seen historic investment. It is difficult to juxtapose the fact that although we've seen historic investment, clearly this symposium has indicated we have a childcare sector that is still struggling at incredible levels. So I think that should reveal 2 things to us: that there wasn't, that it was a fragile system to begin with, and that this investment that we've had to date has really only kept the doors open. And I think a lot of the things around, a lot of the discussion we've had around workforce, around just the emotional toll on the workforce that does exist, and the lack of an up and coming workforce is still real, despite the fact that we have seen historic investment. There were a number of federal programs that centers were able to access. So one thing I think we need to think about is when we think about what we're going to do to strengthen and things in childcare and increase maybe the number of slots available, because we certainly know that there's need. I think we need to think outside of the single lane of money that's come in for childcare. So that's why when I sort of looked at the programs, we had EIDL loans and PPP loans, which were available to a larger number of groups. Many childcare providers work to get access to them, at times with support from their philanthropic partners or with some of the great regionally based networks. So people were pushed to access things that went beyond the traditional streams. And I do think as we look forward to a solution, once again, it's really incumbent upon us to think about childcare outside of simply the childcare scholarship. This is a bigger problem. This is serving a bigger need. So we also had grant programs that were targeted to childcare, and I mentioned a few of them here, But we also were able to access some dollars in New Hampshire that were more discretionary through the Gopher group that gave additional dollars to childcare because they recognized the need. So all this being said, we're still in a place of extreme crisis. I think we need to think about what our long-term stabilization, I think we need to think in a few buckets. Number one, we need to think about what do we do in the immediate need to create more stability, to create more slots, because we know there is still extreme need. We need a sort of short-term solution, but we need to balance that with a discussion of what we do to strengthen the sector long-term. So currently there is a stable childcare stabilization grant program that the state of New Hampshire is distributing. There remains money to be distributed. And coupled with that, in the last federal package was a discretionary spending line that the state is still determining of what that is going to do. And I think this represents a great opportunity for us to try some things. And if there's one message I would get across to this group is being willing to try things that might not work, because that is the only way we're really going to change some of the systemic challenges. Obviously, I hope that they do work. And I think what is exciting about this group is we have such an amazing group around the table with such different perspectives. And I think, once again, such opportunity to think differently, because long-term, I think we're going to have to think differently about how we support childcare, what childcare access looks like. Another key theme that I'm feeling is coming from this group is we know we have challenges in the infant and toddler space in terms of availability of slots, but we can no longer think about childcare only up until the age of 5. We need to think about the coverage for school-age children. When the schools shut down, the reality of the role that school has played in supporting parents' ability to work was made very clear. And we now have the remaining need as children are out of school, either for quarantines or for symptoms, that is not going away. And for workplaces that require employees to be on site, that is going to continue to be an ongoing challenge that we need to have at front of mind, that when we're talking about childcare, we are talking about solution that must address the broader range of children. So we have the ARPA dollars, stabilization dollars going directly to centers. We have highly flexible discretionary funds. The state is yet to allocate, but has 2 years to spend. We have county and city dollars. These municipal dollars, I think, represent a great opportunity for us to work alongside our municipal partners and the private sector to trial some innovative things that are going to allow the solutions to sit sort of closer to the local level. And I think that that is something we need to be actively thinking about engaging in. There's an interesting model that's come out of Manchester, where they were able to use some of their municipal ARPA dollars to sustain a very comprehensive home visiting program for parents. But it's thinking about, how does the early childhood system, how does childcare interface with some of these spending decisions, and how can we ensure that that's part of our considerations? And then I know there's a lot of discussion about the president's plan of Build Back Better. We don't know what that's going to look like. Childcare remains in the mix, but that does represent longer term sustainable investment. And I think Dr. Carson spoke in her that one-time money isn't going to fix this, but longer term sustained investment that I think should come from multiple sources, which in my view is the federal government, the state making an investment, as well as philanthropy and the private sector, because businesses obviously are sitting at this table because they see the true impact of this crisis on their workforce. And I love that we're addressing both the physical, I'm not able to hire, as well as the incredible mental and social and emotional drain on parents, and I think on children and families more broadly. So what does the future look like? And this is where I'm really excited that this is session 1 of 2, because I have to end on an optimistic note. Things are really difficult now, but I feel like we also have such amazing potential with this focus on childcare. So we need to both, once again, address short-term, really imminent needs while keeping thoughts around more long-term systemic change. From my New Hampshire perspective, we need to make sure New Hampshire is well positioned to maximize on federal investment and really work and encourage the state to make an increased or to make a state investment that that will augment what the feds bring in and show that the state takes this new attention on childcare and really translates this into something tangible within the state budget. We need to be cognizant that we balance the needs of infants and toddlers with the preschoolers and older. One thing in Build Back Better, there are going to be a few streams of funding, one of which is around broader childcare, another which is around pre-K. In New Hampshire, where we have no existing state pre-K system, we have an ability, I think, to craft a system that is really going to be true mixed delivery, that gets money into childcare centers while increasing access for all children. And then the last point we need to do is we need to make sure as we do this work that we ensure we're keeping parent preference and changes in workplaces front and center. Parents need to have a voice at the table. And I think sitting alongside their workforces, when we hear about workplace flexibility, changes in potentially someone had mentioned shifting to a 4-day work week, we need to make sure that the childcare sector that we're building and supporting reflects both the changes in work, the changes in parent preference, and ensures a long-term viability for those working in the sector. So now I just have to figure out how I get out of this. Someone may need to help me.
I think at the bottom, you should be able to, or at the top, it should say stop share.
Okay, I'm trying to. All right. All right. Thank you. Sorry about that. Anyway, thank you so much for having me. And once again, I really look forward to the next chapter of this.
Thank you, Christina. You teed us up so well because so much of what you talked about is things that we're going to talk about in our second session. So thank you so much for that. We're now going to shift to the hearing from the Vermont side. We have Allie Richards, the CEO of Let's Grow Kids, who's been there since 2015. Let's Grow Kids has a strong focus on childcare and early education opportunities. This organization spends time educating the general public as well as pushing for policies that support young families in Vermont. And I believe that you brought Adeline Jewett with you today, who's the CEO of Vermont Creamery, and in your words, an incredibly sophisticated business childcare champion. So welcome to you both, and you are welcome to just share with us what you're seeing on the Vermont side.
Thank you so much, Becky. It is just a pleasure to be with you all today and listen to all these stories. What a powerful testimonial. Usually I'm in the position to share the case making from the family, child, community, economy, employer side. And I just couldn't have imagined a better tee up from everyone, leading all the way up from the personal to the data. And I just want to then say, so what is Let's Grow Kids? You know, we have been in existence since 2000, the year 2000. And it was really a group of folks who cared deeply about the state of Vermont and wanted Vermont to thrive and have a sustainable future. And they kept doing work in communities, they kept looking at the research, they kept looking at the data, and all roads led to high quality, affordable, equitable childcare. So it became our singular mission at Let's Grow Kids for all the reasons you just heard about this morning. And I have to say, we have two board members here today who are in this community, Jenny Williams and Meg Seeley. And we just have this crew of folks who literally are saying the single most important thing we can do for a bright future in all these dimensions is fix childcare. Now and what does that mean? Fix the funding for childcare, because you've heard it today. There are acute issues right now, but at the end of the day, these are all systemic issues that have been around forever. As a society, we've never really decided we care about childcare and we put our resources towards that. So we've been at this for such a long time. We've tried a lot of different things. And what is clearer and clearer is that there is no magic bullet. We love to innovate our way out of this. We've tried for decades. And at the end of the day, you need public policy change and public investment for all the reasons you've heard. Why? Early educators cannot afford to make less doing this work, and parents cannot afford to pay more. So something's got to give. Some public funding must fill that gap. And guess what? It's a public good like K through 12. We pay entirely for K through 12 education because we know we benefit from it. In 0 to 5, you've just heard the arguments. you actually benefit more as a society from cost savings, from thriving families and reducing stress, reducing costs down the road, and spurring the economy immediately, because it's like a stimulus effect when you fund childcare. You're creating thousands of jobs, you're putting people to work, you're lifting a whole sector of mostly women out of poverty wages, you're changing your demographics. So it hugely benefits us in a way that is outsized to the actual investment. We just not had the courage as a country or states to put public resources towards this, because it's a big dollar figure. In Vermont, we estimate it's about $250 million a year to fill the gap, to have the highest quality, affordable system. But guess what? We spent 1.8 billion on K through 12. So we're saying 250 million a year that would make itself back almost immediately in immediate economic returns for the state, creating a more stable environment, reducing the stagnation of wages, and all these other things we know we'll get from child outcomes and families. So that's sort of Let's Grow Kids and why we exist. And we do two things. We're on the ground readying the system for investment. We've been doing work in communities with a team of early educators, again, some of whom are on this call today, and you might know Brenda Metzler, Sharon Harrington, and others in the community. We help build high quality childcare through grants, technical assistance, things such as, professional development supports, business practices supports. These are businesses, and shared services, trying to make childcare today as high quality and efficient as possible. But at the end of the day, that is not sustainable work. It doesn't fix wages. It doesn't fix affordability. So the second thing we do is basically run a campaign to have all like today. This is so just wonderful that you all have gathered from all different sectors to put a spotlight on this issue. It's basically to say, does the public understand, do our lawmakers understand what's at stake and how worth it is to get this done, and create forums to make policy decisions to sort of direct the rest of sort of the work ahead of us to ensure this is an equitable, high quality system. So that campaign is well underway. And the great news, last year in Vermont, last legislative session in May of this current calendar year, we passed H171, a landmark childcare bill. And it basically did three things. It said, we get it. We all get this now. We cannot go home empty-handed. We must fix wages. So we'll set a minimum compensation standard for early educators in Vermont. And then we must fix affordability, so no family pays more than 10% of their household income with a sliding fee scale. So we literally said in statute, we're not going to go home without these by 2023. Then we made $12.7 million of investment to lay the foundation, put the IT system in place that will allow us to do things like household income and other pieces like that, and then make incremental movement towards affordability and eligibility through our childcare financial assistance program. Then it did one more thing. It created two studies. A governance study, how do we regulate, hold ourselves accountable to this new funding for childcare? And two, how do you pay for it? What exactly is the final cost estimate, and where will the money come from? And so I loved what Christina said. I have to say, I rarely hear that. Let's not be afraid to make mistakes. That's a brave thing to say. Well, I got to say, Vermont, New Hampshire, we're small enough. Shame on us if we can't figure this out. The data is there, the stories are there, the logic is there. What we are doing with this governance study is saying, let's just hold ourselves accountable, make the investment. We don't actually ask these questions for any other dollar we spend in our multi-billion-dollar state government budgets, but we're going to ask it here because it's the right thing to do. And we know we're going to see great returns. So let's just say we're going to put the money in, and then we're going to hold ourselves accountable through sort of public-private oversight of a public-private market, because parents do pay. So it's not totally free, for all, it's not compulsory like K through 12. We're going to put that money in, and we're going to say, what is it doing for childhood outcomes? Third grade reading scores, special education spending, all these different things. And what is it doing for our economy? Are women participating in the workforce more? Is our unemployment going down? Are our demographics going up? We know these things will happen. And if they're not, we need to take a hard look and see if we're not implementing it correctly. But we are small enough, we can make course corrections. We know we have to do this, and it is urgent. So that's really good news. The second big thing of good news is, for the first time in our history, we might be making federal investment any day now, fingers crossed, in this major way. Christina alluded to this, but it is real. Universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds. That is millions and millions and millions of dollars to defray these costs in states. Childcare, parent affordability, wages for early educators, exactly what we're talking about here. So no change in policy, just money to support our efforts in the state and reduce the amount of state resources we need to find. It's huge. Let it pass, right? Like if this passes, it would make all of our jobs easier. And it would really ensure, now that we've all sort of understood the problem, we're coalescing around this problem, that we're going to get this done. So that's major. Let's track that. Let's make sure that we implement that well. Should it pass, it would be huge. So then the final thing that I will say is the incongruity of the moment. It's so bizarre to be closer than ever to fixing the systemic issues, getting funding in the system, getting this shared understanding of the problem. We've never been closer. At the same time, like you've heard today, the pandemic and other things have really exacerbated the crisis. We have an emergency. I mean, hear from these parents and early educators, we have an emergency now. It's not new, but it is sort of heightened and it's an acute emergency. So what we've been trying to do in Vermont is just like, it sounds like you all are doing in New Hampshire. You have to sort of do a lifeline today while we fix this problem forever. So let's not lose childcare today. What can we do about that? One-time ARPA dollars for wage supports to keep folks there and to build the pipeline. You could pool money for healthcare premiums to help early educators pay for that. You can go in other channels. I loved what Christina said about that for workforce development, traditional workforce development dollars, put them to childcare. It's the workforce behind the workforce. There's lots of programs you could steer towards childcare today. So it's all of that and more. Other things, for example, you could use municipal ARPA dollars to support local childcare centers that are trying to get off the ground, to do some of these things. Lots of communities have these municipal dollars and are trying to figure out how to spend them now. A little bit goes a long way in the childcare world. So it's my pleasure to also be joined. I want to make sure I give Adeline plenty of time, by Adeline Druart. Adeline is the CEO of Vermont Creamery. And at the end of the day, right, we need to come together on a policy solution. She is the perfect sort of example of a business owner that said, this is a crisis. What do I do for my employees? Got involved, realized it was systemic, is doing all this work on the ground, and has become one of our best voices from the business community to say, we as businesses need to make the case about the public investment and why it's a great return, just like we do in our businesses all the time. And so Adeline, thank you for being here today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you, everyone, for having me. It's been very gratifying to work with Nestro kids over the past few years. And I would say 2020, that was the year that we really got to realize how broken the system is, not only at the state level, but the impact that it has on our people and our ability to run businesses. So I'm a proud partner of Let's Grow Kids on the childcare campaign, because we know that our lives and the lives of our employees relies on affordable, accessible, and quality childcare. So Vermont Creamery, we've been in business for 40 years. We make specialty delicious cheese and butter in Vermont. We have 130 employees. 85% of our workforce is in manufacturing. And in my 20 years experience, I never seen such a challenging time for our workers and for employers. I'm very dedicated to this issue. I'm a mom. I have two young boys, a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old. And like a week like this week, I have help for morning shift, for afternoon shift, to just make sure I can show up to work and run my business. But I also know that my employees who work on the line don't have the luxury to be able to call and help. Literally, if their childcare closed, they can't come to work, and I have to shut down our line and call customer and say, we can't meet your demand. This is what happened to us, all of us, in March 2020. In the food industry business, we had basically an overnight shift on how we're going to conduct business. People had to continue to come to work. And we saw so many of our employees that couldn't come because childcare was closed. So we had to quickly pivot. We implemented some new protocol and procedures, such as paid emergency leave for school closing, for childcare closing. But we know that, individually, we cannot fix the system. We could all, as businesses, look at building infrastructure within our businesses, but we're in the business of making cheese, not running an on-site childcare. We also know that businesses have to come to the table in a forceful way, because we have a shortage of workers. We had that issue before the pandemic, And then with the pandemic, it really put a spotlight on women leaving the workforce faster than ever. And so we need to solve that. And my role in this campaign has been to rally the business community and said, we can't complain that we don't have enough workers without taking a hard look on how we're going to support people to come to work. And businesses has a role to support not only the infrastructure, but also a role to be part of this investment when we talk about public investments. So what have we done together with Let's Grow Kids? Well, we've met with the governor and have built a coalition of a small group of business champions to build a task force that worked and led to the H171 bill that just passed. We are reaching out to our peers across the state. We speak and come and support Let's Grow Kid in meeting like this one. We offer quote, we offer sponsorship, we testify. There is many ways that we are involved as business leader, but I would say that businesses has a crucial role, and now is the time for us to step in and really support this systemic change that we all are driving towards to. Vermont is the second oldest state in the nation. If we don't have the infrastructure to support family to come and live and thrive in our state, there won't be any economic recovery. And so to me, childcare is the most essential infrastructure investment that we can do as a state and as private businesses. So thank you so much for having me. Look forward to hearing more about the conversation as the day unfolds.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our speakers. We are going to be right on time here, so this is perfect. And it's, the last couple speakers have really felt like a rallying cry, which is wonderful, right? It's getting us jazzed up and thinking about what can we do about this issue that we all see as a problem. And our next session really will focus on that. And so we're looking forward to having all of our speakers and all of you back for session number 2 to really start thinking about next steps. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah to wrap us up. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Becky, for facilitating today's session, and thank you to all of our speakers for sharing your experiences, your expertise, and your dedication. I also want to express my gratitude to the audience and for your many contributions via chat. I hope that you've all found today's presentations informative as we develop a shared understanding of how the childcare crisis is playing out in the Upper Valley. As you know, our next session is on Wednesday, November 17th from 8 to 9:30 a.m., again via Zoom. Speakers will share solutions and models that are currently underway in our region and that might be replicated, as well as opportunities for new initiatives. As Becky mentioned earlier, this next gathering will include a breakout session to enable the audience to delve into the morning's content in small groups, sharing ideas and possible next steps. We'll also have a call to action, inviting session participants to join working groups that will be formed early in the new year. Building on this symposium and on the collective experience and expertise of the participants, the groups will be designed to tackle specific aspects of the childcare crisis and work toward a shared vision for change by undertaking concrete action and implementing solutions. Later today, you'll receive a short evaluation form providing you with an opportunity to give us feedback as we finalize the planning for the next session and beyond. Within the next 2 weeks, we'll send out a synthesis of today's chat, responding to questions posed and summarizing comments and information that you've shared throughout the session. We hope that these resources will be valuable and that you'll join us on the 17th. For now, thank you again for your participation, and may this be the beginning of a larger effort that supports, complements, and amplifies the work that is already underway so that the Upper Valley can offer affordable, high-quality childcare to all who need it. Thank you.